Well, there's a lot of realities going on right now in our Western culture that tells us that we're not in Kansas anymore. This is an article from the Epic Times. Actually, it's over in the opinion column, and I thought it was very interesting in regards to this commentary. The title of this is Thoughtcrime has become a reality. And here's the basis of what's going on. In several Western countries, people are receiving visits from the police to question them about their, not the criminal view, about their political views. And some have been arrested. Cases in the UK and New Zealand have involved people who made comments against mass migration and Islamism. In a May 4th viral video posted on a Facebook in New Zealand, a New Zealand man is questioned by police for his alleged posts about the mosque shootings in Christchurch. Of course, the real issue isn't about religious intolerance. It is publicly accepted for people, including public leaders, to openly condemn religions such as Christianity. This is very specifically a political issue related to state policy on mass migration, which is often heavily from, yes, Muslim countries. Condemning state policies have become synonymous with the double standard on intolerance, which is punishable by the state. And by latching their policies to social issues, the political parties have found a way to silence people who are criticizing their policies by using the powers of state for harassment and intimidation. Well, even in the United States, similar practices are now in place, only they're being enforced by large corporations. Yes, Chase Bank is accused of canceling the accounts of some customers who have right-wing views, and I say right-wing views. Twitter and Facebook are accused of censoring conservatives, and Google is accused of firing employees for questioning the company's culture of political correctness. Well, this takes us back to a certain author from 1949 who wrote a book 1984. So yes, in 1949, he wrote the book 1984. Most of you know that the author is George Orwell. And it's about his depiction of a fictional thought police, and where he envisioned this secret police force as being tasked with finding thought criminals and punishing them for thought crime. So if you don't know what's going on in regards to this, yeah, right now there are companies that are hiring, for example, or organizations, the Southern Poverty Law Center, are hiring all sorts of different people to go in and scan through Facebook, Twitter, all the different social medias, Instagram, Periscope, to find out if there's anybody that could be accused of a hate crime, of what they call as hate crime, because hate crime is actually now based on one's opinion. If someone thinks that you say something that's offensive, then they can bring you up on hate crime charges and get that word out, send it out, let the banks know, let your credit card companies know. In fact, MasterCard is a company that is now cutting off people that might have conservative or libertarian points of view. So these people have been tasked over the Southern Poverty Law Center and others in order to weed out those that might be a detriment to our changing cultural revolution that is taking place. Well, let's go on a little bit more about in this article. These thought crimes, as Orwell imagined, refer to illegal thoughts, including unspoken beliefs or negative views toward the fictional ruling party under English socialism, also known as INGSOC. So it says, this ideal good citizen of this system, Orwell said, is expected to have no private emotions and no respites for enthusiasm. He is supposed to live in a continuous frenzy of hatred of foreign enemies and internal traitors, triumph over victories, and self-abasement for the power and wisdom of the party. Well, what is this all about? He brings up another theoretical point of view called doublethink, and examples of what doublethink are like this had been seen under Hitler's National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazis. Stalin's Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and Mao's Chinese Communist Party. All three regimes had their own forms of thought crime, and people risk imprisonment or death for opposing the ruling regimes. Now, that's the reality of our most recent history. George Orwell was talking about 1984. Well, the deeper nature of the socialist ideas is in the struggle. And much like Orwell's depiction of the populace living under the fictional or his fictional Ingsoc regime, people are expected to hold a continuous frenzy of hatred. Have you seen that going on here in our news in the last couple years? The system or these systems rely on the state identifying a privileged group, which is framed as taking advantage of the oppressed. And anyone who says otherwise is deemed guilty of ideological treason for aligning with the privileged. Well, right now, it happens to be that the privileged group must be white males. So anybody that would take up the cause of saying, this is crazy, why are you doing this to white males? Well, then you are now being framed as, and there is a frenzy of hatred against you. I mean, after all, look at the meltdown of people and all sorts of newscasts and that are brought up in YouTube of people that have this Trump derangement syndrome, I think is what they call it. It's crazy. What is up with this weirdness? But nevertheless, I think Orwell is imagine exactly what would be going on today. And then think about the complete conspiring. You say, well, is this a conspiracy theory? Well, if Orwell talked about it then, and it seems like now in the year 2019, we've really gotten to the point of what was imagined by Orwell, and how did it get there other than through certain levels of social programming and education. Well, let's take it a little bit further. As Orwell imagined, people would go through a series of mental gymnastics to avoid committing thought crimes. This includes acts such as doublethink, in which party members simultaneously held two contradictory viewpoints. In today's world, we've seen this in many cases. The leftist policy that any criticism of Islamism is religious intolerance, but criticizing Christianity is somehow fine, is among the many examples. And so there's another idea. It's called repressive tolerance. And in order to understand modern doublethink, in other words, holding two opposing opinions, and yet having to make sure you eliminate one as not to get censored by the thought police, it says we need to understand the root cause of these wild concepts. Socialists hold that their ideas are utopian. Socialists hold that their ideas are utopian. The ultimate goal of progress toward their envisioned state. Ever hear of the term progressive? And anything that opposes that progress is guilty of all the things they seek to destroy. So, for example, under Mao Zedong, people who opposed his 1967 theory of political correctness, which was used to guard his destruction of Chinese culture during the Cultural Revolution, would be labeled as counter-revolutionary and be killed by the regime. So in other words, if you were a traditional Chinese individual and you were not politically correct, then you were counter-revolutionary because you were traditional and you were killed. In the United States, the idea that anyone who opposes socialist goals should be attacked by any means comes from the Marxist Frankfurt School's theory of a repressive tolerance. So you hear about all these things about people being intolerant, or if you're a white male, then you must be obviously being intolerant. So being you're not tolerant, or if you're a Christian, or if you happen to be Hebrew roots or Messianic, and you hold views that are in opposition to the current thought of socialism in the United States. In fact, socialism that many people, especially among the millennials and Generation Z, are coming out and saying they want socialism. They want their education paid for. They think everybody should get the same salaries and have equal outcome. And that's not necessarily the way that we can actually survive and actually have a culture without increasing authoritarianism placed upon us, because someone will then make up the definition of what a hate crime is. Well, that's going on here. Also, the idea from Herbert Marcuse's A Critique of Pure Tolerance in 1965 held that only things that support the socialist cause should be tolerated, and anyone who opposes it should be met with intolerance. Yeah. If you wonder why this is happening in our culture, this is where it's come from. It introduced a warped concept of tolerance that tolerates only its own views. And then we get another concept that comes out of this, and it's called self-censorship. And the result of these policies, as Orwell imagined, was a state in which people censor themselves, not just in public speech, but even in their own minds. He referred to this as crime stop, which he described as the faculty of stopping short as though by instinct at the threshold of any dangerous thought. In other words, a lot of people are actually out there self-censoring their Facebook comments and their Twitters because they don't want to get kicked off of the social media. In fact, the entrapment of it is so habit-forming and habitual in wanting to go in there and post something, especially when it comes to all of these real intolerance that's going on. When you actually put those into play, people actually say, hey, I'm going to back off of my comments a little bit because I don't want to be completely cut off. If I'm cut off, then how can I ever get my voice heard out there? So that's called self-censorship. Orwell described this self-censorship as a form of protective stupidity that supports the totalitarian regime, even as the defiance of logic. I mean, get this. I mean, after all, you can have completely opposing viewpoints because you self-censor. You're going to take these stupid, I'm going to say stupid ideas because they are stupidity, and they defy logic, and you're going to embrace them because they are politically correct in the environment that we're living in. Orwell called this concept black-white, which had two meanings applied, which he says here, applied to an opponent, it means the habit of impudently claiming that black is white in contradiction of the plain facts. Applied to a party member, it means a loyal willingness to say that black is white when party discipline demands this. You ever wonder why the Democrats never break rank? It's because of George Orwell and these theories that have been applied to their modern political speech. We see the same thing happening today. Intolerance is bad unless it's intolerance of those who oppose socialist policy. Then it's encouraged. Attacks on religion are bad unless they're attacks on religion that the regime opposes. Racism is bad unless it attacks on the oppressive races. So this is what we're looking at right now. And here's just some example of where we're seeing it right now. I pulled this, I just scanned several different articles, and here's some of the headlines that I came across that actually backs up what this author is saying in the article. How about this? Facebook suspends Candace Owens for saying liberal policies incentivize fatherless homes. Yep, it says when a black woman begins discussing the truth, which is that liberal policies have systematically ruined black homes, they censor. Here's another one. Democrats unanimous as House passes bill forcing schools to let male athletes compete in girls' sports. Yeah, and so now it's discriminatory against women. Crazy policies, but you better let the guys compete in girls' sports if those guys aren't good enough in competing in the male sports. How about this survey? Half of students don't believe all speech is protected under First Amendment. And going on, it says here, majority of women, black students, say hate shouldn't be free speech. Well, we're living in a day and age where if you have opposition speech to somebody else, well, someone could deem that as hate speech. And in certain countries, you might get a visit from the local police.